The night was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, as Margaret hurried through the cobblestone streets of Victorian London. The gas lamps flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that danced in the fog. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. She had stayed too late at her friend's house, and now the journey home felt interminable. As she turned down a narrow alley, a chill ran down her spine. She had heard the stories, the tales whispered in hushed tones about Spring-Heeled Jack, the devilish figure with glowing eyes and claws who terrorized the city. But those were just stories, weren't they? Margaret quickened her pace, her heart pounding louder than her footsteps. She was almost out of the alley when she heard a strange metallic clink, like boots striking cobblestone with unusual force. She paused, straining to hear through the thick fog. The clink came again, closer this time. Suddenly, a shadow leaped from the rooftops, landing with an impossible grace just a few feet ahead of her. She gasped, stumbling backward, her eyes widening in horror. The figure before her was tall and thin, cloaked in a dark coat that billowed like bat wings. His eyes, glowing with an unnatural blue light, bore into hers with a malevolent intensity. Clawed hands extended from his sleeves, glinting menacingly in the dim light. "Good evening, miss," the figure said in a voice that was both mocking and eerily calm. "Out for a late stroll, are we?" Margaret couldn't find her voice. She turned to run, but in a single bound, he was in front of her again, blocking her escape. She stumbled back, tripping over her own feet and falling to the ground. The figure tilted his head, studying her with a curious, almost amused expression. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "I only wish to entertain." Margaret scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She remembered the stories, the descriptions of this creature's terrifying agility, and his penchant for toying with his victims. Desperation fueled her next move. She grabbed a loose cobblestone and hurled it at him. It struck his shoulder, but he barely flinched. Instead, he laughed, a sound that chilled her to the bone. "Feisty, aren't we?" he said. "I like that." With another leap, he was upon her, his clawed hand gripping her arm with a vice-like strength. She screamed, the sound echoing through the empty streets. He leaned in close, his breath cold against her skin. "Such a lovely night for a dance," he whispered. Margaret's fear turned to fury. She twisted in his grasp, kicking out with all her strength. Her foot connected with his knee, and he let out a surprised grunt, loosening his grip just enough for her to break free. She ran, her legs pumping furiously, her heart thundering in her chest. Behind her, she heard him laugh again, the sound following her like a dark omen. She burst out of the alley and onto a main street, where a few late-night revelers were milling about. She ran towards them, gasping for breath. "Help! Please help me!" The people turned, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern as they saw her disheveled state. A kind-faced gentleman stepped forward, catching her as she stumbled. "What happened, miss?" "Spring-Heeled Jack," she panted. "He's coming." The man's face paled, but he quickly gathered himself. "Come with me, quickly," he said, leading her towards a nearby tavern. The other people formed a protective circle around them, glancing nervously into the fog. Inside the tavern, the warmth and light starkly contrasted with the terror outside. Margaret collapsed into a chair, trembling. The kind gentleman handed her a glass of water, which she accepted with shaking hands. "You're safe now," he said, though his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "We'll alert the authorities. Spring-heeled Jack won't get you here." But as the night wore on, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that those glowing eyes were still watching her, waiting for another chance to pounce. She knew the legend was real, and she knew that Spring-heeled Jack was still out there somewhere in the darkness, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, searching for his next victim.